So I will start nevertheless with the sponsors, and then hopefully that will give them. They were finishing up the Torah reading when I left. Okay. Today is the 24th, right? Okay. Learning sponsors, A Year of Learning by Sue and Arnie Gerlich, in memory of Malka Pearl Mann and Philip Mann, David ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Beryl ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Yosef Meir ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Henya Rivka Pearl Rosner, Bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, and in memory of family murdered in the Holocaust. Harav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov, Sarah bat Ephraim, Yisrael David ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Ephraim ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Adia bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Miriam bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Pesel bat Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shalom ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shlomo Yaakov ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shmuel ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch. That's it. Shall assure her children and grandchildren, in memory of her uncle, founding member of BRS, Dr. Israel Brook, Yisrael ben Harav Akiva. Marcia Federbush and family, in memory of her husband, Dr. Uriel Paul Federbush, Uriel Pinchas ben Harav Shimon. Sharon and Fred Lisker, their family and many friends, in memory of her dear mom, Harriet Friedman, Edelbus Yaakov. Leslie and Gail Kaplan, in memory of their parents, Harry and Marjorie Siddell, Irving and Pearl Kaplan. Friends of Avi Gitler, Avrameir ben Shimon, and Martha Gitler, Charna Bas Yeshaya. Friends of Toby Paris, Saratova bat Yisrael Dov. Friends of Malka Levi, Malka bat Yosef. Friends of Joe Wolf, Yosef ben Chaim. We have A Month of Learning by Carol and Josh Sanborn in memory of her mother, Yita bat Nachman ben Yamin, Mel and Haran Haller, in memory of his brother Yaakov ben Avraham, Jill and Perry Meltzer, in memory of his father, David ben Fishel Halevi, and her mother, Bela bas Avraham, Dov Budlander, in memory of his wife, Udal bas Yehuda Tzvi. Also A Month of Learning by Stephanie and Fred Mortman, for the refuah shlema of her daughter, Mazal bat Sarah Malka. We also today have A Day of Learning by Arthur Ritholz, in memory of his mother, Bela Yehudis bat Moshe, by Roseanne Barr, in memory of her husband, Raphael ben Avraham, and by Harold and Elaine Rin, in memory of his father, Hazriel ben Shalom Yosef. May the Neshamas have an aliyah, Krenker Rafia, Veldi Yashir Hashem Matzliah, and L'chol B'nai Yisrael a good Gaben Shjar.
We don't mention Jack.
Okay.
Robin,
Sorry?
they didn't mention Jack. Friday.
No, it'll be mentioned Friday.
Oh.
Tomorrow.
Yeah.
It's for Shabbos, isn't it?
Okay, yeah.
It's for Shabbos, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's it tomorrow, sure.
Okay, hopefully it will be in this week's weekly, right?
Right.
Okay. All right. Where are we? On 74A, does that sound good? Right? Okay. All right, I believe that actually today is the 24th, and 2 weeks from today is when we'll be actually finishing Yoma, right? That would be the case. So if you don't have a Gemara Sukkah available, I suggest you need to get one, right? Okay.
It's on the way.
It's on the way?
I hope so.
Okay.
They were out of it months ago.
Oh, doesn't surprise me,
No.
you know. Sometimes I think they cut it a little close, or maybe they weren't expecting a large demand. Okay. Also depends on what you ordered, right? Okay, so let's get to our Gemara in a moment. I want to come back to the fact that we've just quick review that we were discussing. Remember the various garments. We were comparing the fact that who else could have worn the garments of the Kohen Gadol, the 8 garments. And there we said that the Kohen Mashuach Milchama, that particular Kohen, okay, could wear the 8 garments, including the Urim V'Tumim, where if he were consulted, okay, but otherwise he could not wear those 8 garments. And the Gemara had said, according to one view, because of Ava, because of animosity, a Kohen would be jealous that somebody below his status would be, right, would wear those garments. But somebody who, let's say, was a retired Kohen Gadol, for whatever reason, or if he was Tameh, right, and somebody else had to step in, and then he became Tahor again, and that other individual was only temporarily, okay, they could still had the status of the Kohen Gadol.
But it wasn't very specific about his son.
But what it implied, if you remember going back real quick, it implied that we were talking really only about a situation of those who served. The son could only serve in terms of if for the Beis Hamikdash, right, or for the
Right.
Mishkan, but not if he were a, let's say, Kohen Mashuach Milchama. All right? So that made a difference. That would make a difference, right? The new parak then started talking about, other than priestly garments, it talked about issues of kapara and other prohibitions, and in particular regards to eating, drinking, putting on, anointing oneself with oil, and so on and so forth, right? And then we got into a machloket between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish on the amount, okay, that one would be chayiv, right?
Ken,
Yeah.
of course, one question on the language in the art scroll on the Mishnah, the
Yeah.
first line in the Mishnah, when it says Yom Kippur, it's prohibited to engage in achila ishtia. Isn't that kind of a weird
Well,
translation?
You know, the Koran that I have right here in front of me also uses the phrase, it is prohibited to engage in eating and in drinking.
Yeah, what is
I think it's just trying
semantics?
the English language. I mean, we might directly translate it, it's forbidden
To
to
eat and
eat,
drink.
to
Right.
drink, to wash, you know, things like that. But I can understand where they want to use the, let's say in the English, the gerund form of eating, drinking, bathing, etc. So you need to have another verb in there somehow.
Engage.
Okay, so I think it's more of an English methodology of translation than it is, you know, directly.
So
Okay.
it's just semantics.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'll give you another example shortly. Okay, in that case too, where for the purpose of translating it into English, you had to rework the language, right? So we stopped on the top of 74A. I see Zev is there. Somebody else, I can't tell who because it's a phone number, all right? But hopefully the other guys will be getting on, all right? Okay, so our argument was that Reish Lakish was saying basically that it was only D'Rabbanan, okay, that he could argue, right, that the full date size measure was what was prohibited, but half was only a prohibited D'Rabbanan. Okay? Or he said you could take it based on the view of Rabbi Akiva. That's where we went over to the top of 74a.
Right.
Amar Adamo Ser Atzmo Bechol Shehu. That at any amount a person would be, okay, prohibited based on taking an oath. Now we're going to first see that that becomes a bit of an issue here. V'chi tema, okay, kivan de'it leheter min haTorah, and if you're going to say that it is permitted to him by the Torah, kachayel korban shavua, that then if he goes ahead and he breaks that vow by eating the item, right, he must bring an offering, right? V'hatnan, aren't we taught elsewhere in the Mishnah? Shavuat ha'edut einano heget ela beru'uyim laha'id. That the requirement of taking a oath regarding a vow is only fit or appropriate for those who are in a status that they can do so, right? That they can take vows. V'havein ba, and we discussed this. Lema'ute mai, to exclude whom? Rav Papa Amar lema'ute melech, to exclude a king. A king was disqualified from giving testimony because they felt it was not appropriate respect for the king to make him give edus. So Rav Achabar Yaakov Amar lema'ute mesachet bekuvia. That excludes somebody who's a dice player. Okay? Now, what do we mean by playing a dice? V'ha mesachet bekuvia mideoraita mechaze v'chaze. But, says the Gemara, doesn't it imply that normally someone who plays dice by the Torah would be eligible to give testimony? Okay, so why are we saying that that person is disqualified? V'rabananhu depsaluhu, because it's the rabbis who disqualified him. V'lo kachayla alei shvua, and therefore, if that's the person, okay, he is certainly not expected to make this kind of vow. So the Gemara answers Shani Hatam, the Amarkra. Why it's different there? Because we say regarding a pasuk, Im lo yagid, if he doesn't say. V'hai lav bar hagadahu klal. And the Mesachet Bekubia, the dice player, is not whatsoever even potentially able to give testimony of any kind. So that's different because somebody who is in a non-witness status for whatever reason, all right, could never give testimony. Whereas the king, okay, or somebody, all right, it's only, in a sense, a temporary status, right? And that's what the Gemara is going to tell us, ultimately. So we go on now. Kol hecha detane anush karet lo tane asur. Are we saying, therefore, says the Gemara, that when we say the person is punished, okay? Are we talking about the fact that they're not, if it says it's forbidden, that therefore they're not going to be punished by karet? Vahatanya, aren't we taught in the Braita? Afal pi she'amru asur bekulan, even though our Mishnah, right, said that they are punished, right? And it would seem that they're punishable by karet. Lo amru anish karet, ela al ha'ochel, v'shoteh, v'oseh melacha bilvad. That the karet punishment is applied only to those situations where the person is eating, drinking, or doing work, right? Those things that are clearly prohibited, like prohibited labor. Hachi ka'amar. And this is what it means to tell us. Kashe amru asur, when they said it was forbidden, lo amru ela b'chatzi shiur. that it only meant if they were doing a half measurable amounts, let's say. Aval kashi'ur, but if a person ate the amount that is generally considered punishable, okay, namely a full shi'ur, anush karet, then their punishment would be karet. V'afal pi she'anush karet, and even though they may be punished with karet, ein anush karet, ela ochel v'shotev v'osem melacha bilvad. Then, even though the punishment, okay, with a complete measurement is karet, that only applies, let's say, to the issues of eating, drinking, and doing prohibited labor. So the Gemara picks up and then raises the point. V'ibayat ema ki katani asur. And if you want to say that when it teaches that it's prohibited, asha'ara, maybe that only applies to the other examples. Tatanu Rabba Rav Yosef, as taught both by Rabba and Rav Yosef, Bishar Sifrei de Be Rav, in the other books of the school of Rav, namely, Minayan Liyom HaKippurim, She'asur Berechitza B'sicha V'neilat HaSandal U'V'tashmish HaMita. Okay, on what basis is it that on Yom Kippur it is prohibited for washing, anointing with oil, putting on shoes, and conjugal relations? Talmud Lomar, Shabbaton. Why? Because we have the phrase Shabbaton used with Yom Kippur, namely Shvut, namely those items that one must refrain from, and therefore they're not punishable by karet, but they may be forbidden. Okay? Now, what happens? We go on in the Gemara, and it tells us Gufa. Let's go back and look at that machloket between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, right? Chatzi shiur, when it said half a shiur, okay, Rabbi Yochanan is going to challenge Reish Lakish. Rabbi Yochanan amar asur min haTorah. Reish Lakish amar mutar min haTorah. Okay, that was their argument. Rabbi Yochanan amar asur min haTorah, that it's prohibited by the Torah. Kevan dechaze leitz terufe. Why? Because it's possible that they could be joined, right? Isura ka'achil, and therefore, if they can be combined, they will result in the prohibition of eating. Reish Lakish amar mutar min haTorah, that it's permitted from the Torah. Achila amar rachmana v'leka.
And it's not
It talks about
if it's
eating,
not considered
and when we define eating, what is the shiur that is for which one is prohibited? Namely, a full shiur.
right.
Okay? And this is not that case, and therefore this would not be the example. So therefore there would be no prohibition, argues Reish Lakish, for less than the shiur of an olive bulk. Eitive Rabbi Yochanan l'Reish Lakish. So Rabbi Yochanan responds with the following objection to Reish Lakish. Ein li ele kol sheyeshno ba'onesh yeshno ba'hazhara. Okay? Normally we find a situation where when there is a punishment, there is also presented and if the punishment particularly is correct, there is also a warning to the punishment, right? For example, koi, v'chatzi shiur, ho'il ve'eno ba'onesh, yechol eno ba'hazara. Okay? Take the example then of eating the fat of a koi, all right? We don't have a punishment of karet because we don't have a warning. Talmud lomar kol chelev. But elsewhere, the Torah says any fat Okay, midrabanan. So that may be then a prohibition of rabbinically. Ukra ismachta ba'alma. And the pasuk there is simply a ismachta, so to speak, a peg to hang it on, right? Hachinami mistabra. Here too, this seems reasonable. Okay, the isaka da'atach, the oraita. Because if you were to say it was only a source for the Torah, koi sveikahu. Take the example again of the koi. It's in a doubtful status, right? Namely, it's tarich kra la'atuye sveika. And we could argue that it was necessary to bring the verse in order to deal with this question of doubt, this uncertainty. Imi shumha lo iria, okay? Namely, if that's the case, if this is the reason, okay, right? Lo iria, we don't have a conclusive argument. Kasavri, because then we might have thought the following, right? As we go over to the next Amud, right? Koi biria bifnei atzmahi. Maybe we might argue that the koi is neither a domestic animal nor a wild, let's say, animal, but it's a unique variety in and of itself.
What is a koi?
A koi is an animal that I'll define as the progeny of a wild, undomesticated animal that copulated with a domestic animal.
Uh-huh.
Okay? So let's see what the Gemara tells us. De'ilo temahachi. If you don't say that maybe the koi is a unique species, had amar Rav Idi bar Avin. What about that which was said by Rav Idi bar Avin? Afko la'atuye koi. So in other words, the word all must come then from when it said kol chele to even include the fat of the koi. Koi sveikahu. The koi is a questionable, uncertain status. It's derich kra the rabuye sveika. Do we say that we require a pasuk in order to include an uncertain status? Elabria shane, but rather as an animal, as a species, it's different. Hachanami bria shane. Here too, we might argue that eating that half measure is a sveika, is an uncertain status, and therefore we can't say that it's punished, okay, by karet, right, in that case. So that seems to be the point. By the way, the Koren has an interesting note on the animal koi. It gives, besides the definition, okay, but right, it does tell us that there's a chance that there could be certain kinds of animals like a water buffalo or a certain kind of wild sheep that might be fall into that kind of category. Okay. All right. Let's go now back to our text. Tanu Rabbanan. Okay, we have to cite from our Mishnah that there is a midrash that explains the following part of the pasuk. The rabbis taught ta'anu et nafshotechem, that you should afflict your soul. Right? What does that mean? Yachol yeshev b'chama o batzina, kedei sheyitzta'er. One might have thought that it meant that you had, that if you were required to sit in the sun or sit in the cold in order to afflict yourself, right? To make yourself suffer. Talmud Loma, V'chol malacha lo ta'asu. Elsewhere we have a pasuk that says you shall not do any kind of work. Ma malacha she va'al ta'aseh. The same way when it refers to work, it is referring to the fact of refraining from doing something, right? Af inui nefesh. So likewise, we're going to say that the suffering that is required for Yom Kippur, she va'al ta'aseh. It's not a commandment to do something to yourself,
That's great.
but just it's a statement of refraining from doing something. Okay? And therefore refraining from eating, drinking, etc. Ve'ema, and therefore I might say, Heicha diativ bishimsha v'chayim le, okay, where one sits in the sun and it's too hot for them, you might tell them to get right. Lo nema le kum tuv betula. Wouldn't one say to them, get up and go into the shade? Yativ betula v'karir le. If he's sitting in the shade and finds it too cold, lo nema le kum tu b'shimsha. Wouldn't we say to him, get up and sit in the sun? Dumia de malacha. And that's comparable to the issue of labor, of work. Ma malacha lo chalakta ba. With regards to work, okay, we don't make a distinction. In other words, we don't clarify that it has to be, okay, the prohibition of labor. We don't say, well, you can do this labor, but not that labor. Af inui lo tachalok bo. So likewise, with regards to suffering, we don't make a distinction in that regard. Or Tanya Idach, we could explain it with the following braita. It says, Ta'anu et nafshotechem, that you should afflict your souls. Yechol yeshe bechama ubetzina v'yitzta'er. Again, we might have thought it means that one must sit in the sun or sit in the shade or in the cold and be uncomfortable, right? Talmud Lomar, B'chol malacha lo ta'asu. Elsewhere, pasuk says, all manner of labor you shall not do, right? Ma malacha, whereas what we mean by labor, davar shechayavin alav b'makom acher, which means like similar to Shabbat. It is a situation where you have a liability, okay, in terms of resulting in karet, and therefore it's prohibited. Af inui nefesh. So likewise, when we're saying affliction of the soul, excuse me, shechayavin elav b'makom acher, that it's like one would have an obligation, a liability in another situation. Ve'eza zeh, and what is it? Zet pigul v'notar. It would be like the examples of pigul and notar, right? Which by eating them, what is the punishment? Karet. And therefore here too, that is the parallel if one were to eat on Yom Kippur. Okay? Now, at this point, the Gemara is going to pick up more from that braita. Avi pigul v'notar shehin b'karet. I would bring the example of pigul and notar, right, for which one was punishable by karet. V'lo aviat hatevel she'eno b'karet. But I wouldn't bring the example of eating tevel, untithed produce, which is not punishable by karet. Talmud Loma, therefore the text teaches us ta'anu, that you should, right, in a sense, suffer, afflict oneself. Ve'initim et nafshotechem riba. And the fact that we have another pasuk that then says, you shall afflict your souls, means that it increases, it includes other things. So if that's the case, maybe I should include the punishment of karet for eating tevel. Avi hatevel shahu b'mita. But then I might bring the example of tevel, okay, where the punishment is death at the hands of heaven. V'lo avi et hanavela she'ena b'mita. But I wouldn't bring the example of eating nevela, right, an animal carcass that wasn't slaughtered by shchita, right? She'ena b'mita, that punishment is not mita b'yadei shamayim. Talmud lomar. However, again, my pasuk said ta'anu, said to afflict, and then another pasuk says ve'initim et nafshotechem, that you shall afflict your souls. Therefore, riba, maybe I have to include that as well. I'll give another example, says the Braita. Aviyat hanavela shahu balav. I'll bring the example of the unslaughtered animal carcass, right? That where there's simply a lav, a simple prohibition, a negative commandment. V'lo aviyat hachulin, but I won't bring the example of chulin, of unconsecrated food. She'enan belav, where there is no prohibition, right? Talmud lomar. However, the text teaches ta'anu, you should afflict yourselves. And another pasuk again said ve'initim et nafshotechem, that you shall clearly afflict your souls. Maybe therefore riba, I have to include that as well. The Braita then goes on. Avicha chulin. Maybe then I need to include the example of chulin, non-consecrated food. She'enan bekum echo, okay, where that's not associated with a mitzvah of doing something, namely to come and don't eat it, right? What happens, right? At the truma, I wouldn't bring truma then. Shehi bekum echo, whereas regarding truma, there is a requirement specifically to eat it, a positive mitzvah. Talmud lomar, however, our text tells us, right? Ta'anu, again, afflict, and ve'initim et nafshotechem. Another pasuk saying to inflict your souls. Riba, maybe then I have to include it. Aviyat hatruma she'ena beval totiru. Okay, says the Braita. Maybe I will include truma because that's not part of the included in a pasuk which prohibits leftovers. Okay, right? V'lo avi et hakodshim shehen beval totiru. Okay, I won't bring in kodshim, which is included in the prohibition of not leaving over. Talmud loma, again, my pasuk said ta'anu, that you should afflict, ve'initim et nafshotechem, a second pasuk that said again, afflict your souls, okay, and therefore riba, and therefore maybe I have to include kodshim as well, right, and therefore a positive mitzvah, okay, is the situation here. Now the Gemara comes back and therefore needs to deal with this cumulative, I'm going to say, attempt at trying to show what are we including and what are we not including besides the Mishnah. Okay? In other words, what they're trying to get at is, are we really talking about simply refraining from something? Or are we talking instead about positive acts that have to be included within the concept of inui, of affliction? Okay. V'im nafshach lomar. And if you want to say, harehu homer, that elsewhere we have a pasuk that says as follows, V'ha'avadati et hanefesh hahi, namely that regards to Yom Kippur. It says, I will destroy that soul from among the people. Inui shehu avedat hanefesh. Maybe we're talking about affliction that results in, right, avedat hanefesh, destroying the soul. In other words, death. The ezazeh, okay, and what might that be? Okay, ze achila ushtia. Okay, that can refer to eating and drinking, namely total refraining, right, from eating and drinking is going to result ultimately in death. Okay? So the Gemara then explains, Mai v'im nafshcha lomar. So what does it mean when we say, if you want to say, v'chitema? Then you would need to say, ba'arayot kamishta ekra, that maybe we're talking about a situation, okay, where the death penalty would apply. And if we're talking about one of the other prohibitions of the Mishnah, conjugal relations, we're going to connect it with forbidden conjugal relations that could result in the death penalty, right? Because that's arayot. And maybe, therefore, we're saying that's what the verse is talking about. Hare hu omer. Why? Because it says, v'ha'avadati hanefesh. It says that I will destroy that soul. Inui sheyesh bo avedat nefesh. That would seem to imply affliction that results in the loss of one's soul. In other words, that causes death. Ve'eza zeh. And what are these? Ze achila ushtia. That again comes to the example of eating and drinking would cause death. Now, Debei Rabbi Yishmael Tana, the Academy of Rabbi Yishmael, taught as follows. Ne'emar kan inui. It says in one place, affliction. V'ne'emar lahalan inui. And in another case, it also refers to affliction. Okay? He's going to come up now with a different rationale. Where else does it talk about affliction? When they were in the midbar, namely. Okay? Ma lahalan inui ra'avon, afkan inui ra'avon. The same way in one place it talked about hunger, right? So that was the affliction. So here too, we're going to say it must be referring to hunger. V'nelif, and we can learn this from Me'im ta'aneh et bnotai. Maybe, says the Gemara, we should learn it from there. Okay, another example of Inui, where Jacob and Laban had this back and forth, right? Danin Inui derabim me'inui derabim. What can we do? We can learn affliction on the part of the many from a different example of affliction on the part of the many. Ve'ein danin inui derabim me'inui diyachid. But we can't learn affliction on the part of the many from affliction on the part of an individual. Okay? And that was regards to the pasuk where Laban warns Jacob, if you afflict my daughters, right? So that was only vis-a-vis an individual, Jacob. It wasn't vis-a-vis the entire community. So another attempt on the part of the Gemara. V'nelech mi'inui d'Mitzrayim. Maybe we can learn it from the example of affliction vis-a-vis Egypt, right? Dichtiv. Why? Because we have a pasuk that says there, Vayar et anyenu, right? Say it at the Haggadah, right? That Hashem saw our affliction. Va'amrinim. Okay, what was that affliction? Zo prishut derech eretz. It was the fact that they had forced, because of the labor, right, to abstain from conjugal relations. Ella, rather, says the Gemara, danin inui bidei shamayim mi inui bidei shamayim. We can determine, make the parallel, right, of affliction that is, I could translate it in the hands of heaven, okay, but let's say divinely required, as opposed to affliction that is in the hands of human beings. Okay? Danin inui b'yedei shamayim, inui b'yedei shamayim. We can make the parallel there. Ve'ein danin inui b'yedei shamayim, me'inui b'yedei adam. But we don't draw a comparison, okay, or the parallel, or determine the judgment, okay, of it, affliction determined by heaven compared to that determined by human beings. Okay. Now, now, having attempted to explain each of these, comes back and gives us another approach, right? Hama'achilcha min hamidbar. I'm sorry. Hama'achilcha man bamidbar leman anotcha. Right? He fed us, okay, manna in the wilderness in order to afflict us. Right? Rabbi Ami v'Rabbi Asi, the two of them. Chad Amar, one said, Eino domeh mi sheyesh lo pat besalo, lemi she'en lo pat besalo. Okay? He uses the colloquialism, so to speak. We can't compare one who has bread in his basket to one who doesn't have bread in his basket. Okay? In other words, we've seen that phrase in the Gemara elsewhere, that it says that somebody who has we saw it before, for example, with the person who was leading the goat out, the mishtaleach, and that they had food stuff at the rest stops. So his hunger would not be as severe because he knows he has at least access to food. Okay? V'chad amar eino domeh mi shero'eh v'ochel l'mi she'eino ro'eh v'ochel. And the other explained it differently. He said, you can't compare one who sees the food, okay, and can eat it to one who doesn't see food and therefore cannot eat it. So Amar Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef then says, Mikan remez l'sumim she'ochlin ve'ein tzve'in. From here we have a reference to individuals that are blind, okay, and they can eat, but they may not be satisfied. Amar Abai, says Abai Hilkach, man de'it le su'udata, right? One then who has a meal and can eat from it during the day, lo lechle ela biyama, should not eat except during the day, because then he can see how much he has and know to be satisfied. Amar Rabbi Zera, and Rabbi Zera says, Ma'ikra, what pasuk does this reflect? Tov mar'eh einayim mehalach nafesh. Better is it seeing with the eyes than wandering for desire. Amar Reish Lakish, Tov Mara Einayim Be'isha, Yoter Migufo Shel Ma'aseh. Reish Lakish says, times it's better to simply look upon a woman rather than have the actual sexual act. Okay? Shenema, why? Because it says, Tov Mara Einayim Mahalech Nefesh. That better is the looking of the eyes than the wandering of the desire, wandering of the heart. And now we begin to finish up. Ki yitain bekos eno yetalech b'meisharim, citing this machloket between Rabbi Ami and Rabbi Asi. Another pasuk where it says, right, don't look upon wine when it's red, when it gives its color in the cup, when it slides down smoothly. Rabbi Ami v'Rabbi Asi, Chad Amar, Kol Hanoten. Let's go over a little bit. Eino b'koso, right? Who has his eye on his cup. Arayot kulan domot alav kamishur, right? In other words, one who has always got his eye on his drinks, right? In other words, he imbibes frequently, all right? That's similar to the prohibitions associated with inappropriate relations. V'chadamar, one, kol hanoten eino b'kiso, again, one who drinks habitually. Kol ha'olam kulo domeh alav kimishor. Then the entire world is like flat ground. Okay. In other words, again, he's spends his money all on drink, and therefore he's always got empty pockets. Right now, the pasuk is going to continue. Okay, and then this is where we're going to finish for today. Da'aga belev ish yashchena. Okay, a pasuk. If there's care in a person's heart, let him yashchena. Let him sort of squash it, close it, put it aside. Rabbi Ami v'Rabbi Asi. Again, the two of them. Chad amar yashchena mida'ato. That he should put it out of his head, right? Sort of forcefully push it out of his head. V'chad amar yeshichena le'acherim. And one says he should push it out, okay, because by sharing it with others, okay, by telling it to others, therefore it relieves his discomfort, his anxiety. And that's where we're going to stop for today. And we'll pick up with another example of the discussions between them tomorrow. Okay? So everyone, take care, stay well.
Thank you
Have a
very
good
much.
day.
Goodbye.
All right?